So my name is Amanda Lanier, and I am currently, and have been for 5 years, the director of the Master's in Foreign Language Teaching at Michigan State. So it's one of the few programs in the country that is designed to serve teachers of many different languages, to serve teachers across the country, and that is fully online. And the benefit of that is that we have teachers in so many different places, and it's a challenge to work that way. So now I like to say we've been online since 2012. So we didn't wake up yesterday, and we didn't start in the middle of the pandemic or beginning of the pandemic to be online. But what that means for us is that you guys got to go back to your classrooms, and we continue to be online. But it gives me this window into what's going on all over the country. That when there are particular trends, when there are patterns, when I work with my students and I give them the prompts to reflect on what their experience is like as language teachers, then I get this window, I get this opportunity to see what's happening in programs across the country. And so there have been some interesting trends over the last few years. And when I was thinking about what to present for this talk, I decided I'll talk about grammar. Everybody loves grammar, right? Why not talk about grammar all day? No, I did not want to talk about this because I'm so excited about grammar, and I think that all of you are always so excited about grammar. Although probably those of you in the room are among the people who are most excited about grammar. Very often that is what gets you into your interest in language teaching, and that sustains you a bit. But I'm not here because I love grammar. I'm here because I really care about teachers, and I see things happening with teachers that kind of worry me. So this is something that I say with a little caution. But I think sometimes when I work with my students and I try to empower them and to encourage them to think about their teaching in new ways and to operate better in the context in which they teach, then it's almost like success leads to problems, because those are my teachers that look like they're burning out. Those are my teachers that look like they can't settle for conditions that they're not happy with, that they are pushed to teach in ways that they don't believe in, or that they don't see success in what they're doing. And the other trend that's happening is not just that teachers themselves are tired, that things don't seem to be flowing the way that they want, but then also when you look at the programs as a whole, you start to see that the programs are not in alignment with each other, and that you have this frustration because the programs are not in alignment with each other. And over and over and over again, it is, well, this is what I really want to be doing, but my colleague in the next room, we can't coordinate, we can't put our heads together because she teaches this way or he teaches that way and I teach this way, we can't. And so if you go back to saying, okay, well, how do we have quality of life as teachers and effectiveness and satisfaction as teachers? A lot of that's got to come out of being able to work together with other teachers. And that's so hard to do. That can be really, really hard to do. And there are very good things that have been happening in the world language teaching field over the last several years, but it hasn't always led to greater collaboration, greater ability to coordinate with other teachers. So I was checking in today with one of my alumni to see, is this ringing for you? How does this idea, how's what I want to talk about today, how's it ringing true for you? And so he said, yeah, I've been thinking about grammar, and I recognize why you chose grammar when you wanted to talk about this sense of discord. So it's not so much about the grammar, it's more about this issue that we have discord among teachers. Okay, and so I contact my student and I said, do you have a few minutes? Can I run things past you? And he said, okay, well, I'm free at 3:15 when he got out of school. And so he calls me up and we start talking. And I said, can you give me a sense of what's going on with grammar? What do you think about this, and what you think about whether, is it contentious? Is it really, am I on the right track here? And he said, hold on. I can't talk right now. I'm just going to kind of talk quieter and move over to the other side of I'm just checking my surroundings. That's what he said exactly. I'm going to check my surroundings. And I said, all right, I think you said it's not that contentious, but why are you whispering? And he wanted to make sure that the AP teacher in his school couldn't hear him say what he wanted to say to me. And this is someone who has been working with me for a long time. This is someone who probably taught me more about comprehensible input and TPRS than anybody else. I've had about 6 teachers who've been really good teachers to me about those trends. And he said, he's whispering as he walks away. And so he's saying it's not that bad. And then he's saying, but he's not coordinating with the teacher in his school. So I said, okay, case in point, yet again. So I'm going to go through just a few things here. And when I've got a poll live, then you can answer the poll. But so I wanted to know what language you teach, and you put that in the chat. So I'm gonna swing on past this one. And people who watch this afterward will be able to go into the slides, and there are links in the slides that you can use at any time. So right now, the slide that I have active is a poll that is active, but I have links in here. And so anybody who's watching the video later can still get to the polls. So I was curious about what curriculum or textbook you're using. All right. So I'm taking a little side tour, and we're going to come back in just a minute to go on with the points that I wanted to make. And so let's see if we're getting some results on that. Okay. All right, so we'll come back to that in just a minute. Let me give you the exact link for it. And then, so what I want to talk about today, I think, to this audience is probably not so much about your beliefs about grammar as it is about the way that we describe what we're doing with grammar. And what we can do so that what we're talking about, what we're dealing with in our programs is not quite so contentious. So I do teach grammar to teachers to some extent. I'm an applied linguist. So originally I was a theater major, and then I ended up in the Czech Republic teaching English for many years. Czech is one of the most grammatically complex languages you're going to run into. And then Serbian, and then Arabic, and there are all these languages that I have studied. So I'm into grammar, I'm into language learning. But then I came back and did a degree in applied linguistics. And so I had to have this very, very solid base in linguistics. I can describe how language works very, very well. But what has continued to appeal to me is looking at teachers and looking at teacher development and looking at how that works across time, over time, and across languages. So the inspiration for this comes less from the course that I teach in language concepts and more from the course that I teach in language program development and administration. And so it's really, again, as I was saying, it's less about the grammar itself than it is about what it means when we define grammar, how we define it, what the implications of that are when we're trying to coordinate with other teachers. All right. So this is from a research project that I've been doing for a long time with my students, where they actually study their own programs. So they do interviews with their colleagues, with their supervisor, they do a focus group with team members. And there are several things that have been really intriguing that have come out of that project. I haven't published much on it because I do a whole lot of teaching and administration, but that's coming. And this is one of the sort of representative quotes for things that have come out of that project. And it's that, so here's a supervisor saying, each teacher has their own style and their own way of doing things. It's one of the biggest challenges that we face as a large department, because personalities vary incredibly within the teacher's department, and it's hard to get people to even agree on what should be taught in particular levels. And the thing is, when they say personalities, I don't think it's just personalities. I don't think it's about sort of how you operate as an individual. I think it's also about your beliefs about what you actually are trying to accomplish with those learners and where that's going. And that this underlying sense of what it is that we are responsible for doing with learners and where we put our priorities, that's really what keeps us on separate pages. So this project, as this project went on, there was a lot of discussion about how to look at their whole curriculum in a way that teachers could agree, they could come into alignment. And it was very, very hard for them to do that, because there were teachers who said, nope, we have to have the grammar, we have to have the meta language, we have to have the terminology. And there were teachers who were saying, no, I don't teach grammar. I would never teach grammar. Why would I do that? And usually it's not that extreme. It's not that extreme in every program, but so many programs that I've done this project with, maybe 30 programs or something over the many, many states. It comes up over and over and over again that teachers are on a different page about their methodology. And so the exciting thing is that so many teachers have discovered TPRS and comprehensible input in these, and now it's not, it was TPRS and then it was comprehensible input, and now it's acquisition driven instruction. And so I'm keeping up. And that has been empowering for so many teachers. I've seen so many teachers get so excited and so intrigued and interested in changing and developing and getting so much energy out of discovering those approaches and being willing to unsettle every assumption they had about what teaching should look like. And that's been a wonderful thing. But it's also, the more we have teachers who are very confident in that and willing to put those ideas forward, the more that can be a situation where you have this sort of fight club. There really is a Facebook group called the CI Fight Club. It's not as big as it used to be, and it now says Fight Club, lol, LOL, laugh out loud, as part of the name of it on Facebook. Is anybody aware of that? Is anybody a member of the CI Fight Club? And honestly, it was not for fighting. It was for people who really wanted to get in the weeds. People who really want to get in the weeds about Haley Rooney. She's one of mine. To get in the weeds about what it really means to teach with comprehensible input and for comprehensible input. But that's the thing, is that you have people who are more confident about that. But again, now we have the discord around it. And so I just want to know, so this is again kind of like taking a temperature thing, but do you hear these things? Or these things that you've heard people put forward? So I'm not asking you if these are true or not. I'm asking you if you've heard these argued, if you've heard these points made, because I think each one of these in a way taps into something that has become contentious. So, all right, so all of the above. All right, so there's another poll for this. So if you're connecting to the polls, so you're going to click on it just to let me know that if you've heard this. Not if it's true, not if you argue it. Yeah, so we're getting, all right, so let's see. Okay, and you can answer more than one. So if there are lots of them, the chat's kind of blowing up. Okay, good. So yeah, so these are things that are out there, and they're things that I admit, I was in the halls of the International Foreign Language Teaching Fluency Matters conference this summer, hearing teachers go by and saying, oh, they told me I can't ever use desks again. Or, and I don't think that's really what was being said there. I don't actually think that was the way it was supposed to be taken. But there's certain things like this where they're really good ideas on some level, but if we take them to an extreme, they don't serve us very well. And on some level, all of these things are things where I've heard my students argue on one side or the other. Either this is something that I think is really important and I've had to argue for it, and I've had to convince my leadership to let me do this. I've had to make major adjustments to make this happen. It's caused challenges, but I'm sticking with it. And then also people who say, no, I have to use the target language. I have to explain the grammar. I mean, I can't operate that way. And here's the textbook that, I need to rely on a textbook. And honestly, I think you should have a textbook. I think it's really, really, really difficult to teach without that. You're putting a lot on yourself when you're choosing to teach without a textbook. But it doesn't mean that the textbook drives your teaching. It doesn't mean that you are not still the one who determines day to day what is important and how to get through that. And so all of these, I think, they're out there. And I think that they all, on some level, when you push a teacher in that direction, can be beneficial. But all of them, if you take them to extremes and you don't take them sort of judiciously and determine when you want to do that and transition into it, then it can also be detrimental. And I wonder if that's not what part of why I'm seeing also this pattern of teachers wearing out and struggling when I know they're very, very good teachers. In a way, it's the ones that I would get behind first in terms of how good a teacher they are. And that's the heartbreak of it, is that these are people where I want to be in their rooms. I want to be in their classrooms. And those are my teachers that I seem to burn out. And I think it's because they're asking a lot of themselves, and things like giving up your textbook and staying in the target language all the time. And, you know, honestly, I don't know which ones of these you really feel you've aimed for, if you've struggled with, they served you well. But like I said, I think that they can be good, but they become problems when they go to extremes. All right, so this is my student that I checked in with today. So he picks up, he's on the phone, he's starting to whisper. I said, so what's going on? What are you going to do with this teacher who is on a very different page? Well, that other teacher gives a lot of grammar tests and really leans hard on those grammar tests. And so it's not just that this person teaches grammar, it's that this person teaches grammar really heavily. Is that this person puts a lot of grade value on grammar-based tests? Is that this person has a very, very different approach? And so the students get up to the third year and then suddenly go to the fourth year, and it's a shock to them to have such different approaches. And so I said, what are you going to, oh, I'm sorry, I got the names backwards, didn't I? The names are backwards. All right, so I said, so what about the teacher who gives these high stakes tests? And my alum said, I'm still the one who has to put out the olive branch if I don't want this big drop in enrollment when they get to his class. And I said, so you don't think he'll meet you halfway? And my student said, probably not. I'm giving my students some grammar practice to take home, teaching them some meta language. I'm priming them for what's going to happen next year. So now this teacher who, like I said, is one of the ones that's taught me the most about teaching comprehensible input and gotten away from lecturing about grammar, teaching grammar explicitly, has ways of teaching grammar implicitly, says, I'm giving them these lessons to learn all this language about grammar, to learn what the forms are called and to learn exactly what the predicate is and the subjunctive is and when you use subjunctive, and getting a lot of practice on it. Because of that transition to the following year. But you've been teaching grammar all along, they know the patterns. And he says, yeah, they've heard all this language before, they can use it. Now it's just organizing, putting things in boxes, knowing what to call it. Okay. And so what we're getting into when we look at this is that it's not just grammar itself, one way or the other. Just like it's not just the textbook, one way or the other. It's how we do it. It's how we handle it. It's how we talk about it. It's how we work with it. It's what we are controlling and not controlling about the learning process. And so you have these camps, all right? So don't teach grammar, or else you have to teach grammar for whatever reason that you have the sense that you have to. And the way I stand on it, and my students will repeat this, you teach grammar every time you open your mouth. You teach grammar every time you open your mouth. There's no such thing as I don't teach grammar. There's no such thing. Because without grammar, language is nonsense. So I have this metaphor for you. I have a thing with my nose lately where I have a problem with histamine reactions or something, and it turns bright red. So I wasn't thinking about my nose very much until recently. And now I have to think about my nose a lot. What am I, what's going on? Am I having a reaction? What's happening? And I don't always need to think about it. I don't always need to think about my nose, and think about your nose. Like, how often do you really think about using your nose? How much do you think about how it works? You can't describe the anatomy of it. If you've had an anatomy class, medical classes, you might understand really how your nose works, but not necessarily. But when you can't breathe through it, you notice it. When you're in yoga class and you're drawing attention to your breath, you might notice it a lot more. If you've ever lost your sense of smell, you would notice it. So your nose, it's one of those things. I mean, it's the nose on your face. It's plain as your nose on your face, right? So you're aware of it some, and then there are times when there's a problem with it and you become very, very aware of it because there's a problem with it. And there's times when you very judiciously decide to pay attention to how you're breathing and what's going on, to monitor that. And grammar can be very much like that. It's something you take for granted. You cannot ignore it. You cannot leave it behind. It is interwoven with everything that you do because it is the fascia. It is the structure of language. It is everything that holds the language together to make meaning. And yet you might not always be paying attention to it. You might not always be speaking explicitly about it. You might not always talk about what it takes to get it to operate well. And yet there are times when it makes sense to do that. And so when we say don't teach grammar, then here's some ways to flesh that out. So instead of saying I don't teach grammar, we can flesh that out to say, I don't lecture about grammar. I don't hold students accountable for much grammar terminology. So I don't test them on grammar terms or say, form this, show me what this is in this tense, or show me what this is and conjugate it for this person. Don't make students master every aspect of a grammar point before you move on. Language learning doesn't work like that. Language learning doesn't work like that. You can't assume that they're going to master a grammar point before you move on. They spiral, they develop over time. Don't pretend that grammar is one monolithic thing that's used the same time everywhere. So we were watching soccer, we were watching football, and they were saying France were ready to kick their goals. I'm not great at my soccer terminology. France were ready, which sounds like it's a mistake in your subject-verb agreement. But it's because in that context, in British English more than American English, but it makes sense to set France were instead of France are. The French team is. It's the way that you're using it, it's the context. And that will vary also from speaking to writing. It will vary regionally. It will vary depending on who you're talking to, not just in terms of formality, but also a lot of other features of what is most frequent and how you're going to choose to express yourself, and also what's acceptable. And so you can come back to this idea that you can't, it's inevitable. You have to have grammar involved in the language learning process. But if we separate grammar out from meaning and we're not continuing to connect it to meaning, then that's also nonsense. So even, it's not to say that you will never do things that isolate the grammar. That's not what I'm saying either. We're not going to extremes. That's not the point. I don't mean that you should never do things that isolate grammar. There can be good reasons to do that, but loop it back. Why are we doing this? Why is it worth it right now to put this energy in? Why are we doing this where we are emphasizing this right now? Okay. So then one way that I think is helpful to structure this. So this is part of how you're structuring this in your mind. So I think I'm not here to convince you to think differently about grammar. I would like to give you some ways of thinking and some ways of talking about what you do that might play better with people who are on a different page, and also find some of the commonalities if we break it down, okay? But a way that I like to address how we can talk about grammar, if we're going to talk about grammar, is that we can look at whether we're doing it deductively or inductively, okay? And so what that does is it says it's okay for us to talk about grammar sometimes. And now there have been claims over the years. If you take an SLA course, take my SLA course, and we will get into depth about these theories that say that you cannot give explicit teaching about language and have that lead to actual language acquisition. That's not proven. That's what seems to be the case. And we know that it's not helpful. You cannot only teach explicitly and have people develop proficiency in the language. But my take on it is that you can talk about grammar, but if you're going to do that, you want to do it in a way that develops better learners. You're not lecturing, you're not telling, you're developing better learners. And in order to do that, you want them to discover the grammar as opposed to you just setting it in front of them. And so deductive teaching would be, here's the rule, now we're going to practice it, and then I'm going to test you on it to see if you've got the rule, which I expect you to pick up right away and come back tomorrow and have it again next week. So sometimes you do that. Sometimes you pre-teach something because you know it's going to be relevant for a certain text. Sometimes you have a task and you want to make sure they can handle a particular grammar for that task. So again, sometimes you do that too. Sometimes that is warranted. All right. But if you aim for teaching it more inductively and implicitly, then that gives you a way forward. So with inductively, then we show learners lots of input. We give them lots of input, rich input that's appropriate for their level, input they may not understand from beginning to end completely. That's okay. You have to, this is from Stephen Krashen. You have to leave room for them not to understand, because that's where the learning happens. The gap between what they don't understand and what they are trying to understand. That's where learning happens. So you give them input, lots of input, and with enough input, things start kicking in. These pattern recognition skills that we have in our brains. So what you're aware of and what you're unaware of can start to kick in so that you're making sense of this input. Ideally, compelling input that you want to understand. So my 7-year-old was not a great reader. Just now, he's beginning to really be a confident reader. He was a COVID kindergartner. Anybody else have a COVID kindergartner? That was not fun. But he's resisted me on reading. And I just, I'm a linguist. I teach teachers. It was just really frustrating. But when he's engaged, when he's reading about rocks and minerals, he reads about rocks and minerals. He has written his own book that is imitating his book about rocks and minerals. The light came on, it kicked in because it was compelling. When it's compelling, you can give them the input. They can get enough input that it starts tapping into what is going on in the brain, where it's constructed to engage with language and make sense of it. And then what you can also do is start to raise awareness and to draw attention to patterns and to get people to recognize what is happening here. And what that does is that it lets you get to the point that you do label a form, maybe you do draw attention to it, you do acknowledge there's something going on here, it's a pattern, we can give it a name, we can come back to it, we can give you feedback on it later. But in the process of learning it this way, you've been able to tap into some of those processes, you've given them interesting, meaningful input to work with, and you've gotten them to be better learners in the process, so that when they're moving forward, they get less dependent on you and more able to encounter new input on their own and to make sense of it, to get through what they don't understand until they do. So what that does is it gives you a way to say, it's okay to talk about grammar, but you talk about it in this way that is more about discovery. So, all right. Then we say, all right, if we're going to talk about grammar, how do we decide if it's worth it? How do we decide that it's worth putting the time and energy into whatever this is that we're doing, where we're going to take some time in a class that's mostly communicative, that's mostly focused on meaning, that doesn't do a lot of discussing meta language, where we're not lecturing about grammar? In that context, what are we going to do, or when are we going to take those moments when we are going to do a little bit of intensive focus on grammar? And so again, you may not be the primary audience for this. This may be something that you could then convey to others, but it is something that I think is helpful to keep in our heads. That if we're saying, okay, now I want to really focus on this particular form, then you say, why? What is it going to give my learners? Is it going to help them communicate better? Is it going to make them better learners? And is it going to make them willing to keep learning? Okay. And so if we do a test, so let's say our example here is that we're looking at the prepositions that coordinate with particular verbs. Anyone have a problem with that in your language, that English has different prepositions for the same verbs and you have to at some point get really frustrated or decide to let it go, or and this is, I don't count on knowing what prepositions go with the verbs. I go to Reverso and I look up phrases and I see how it translates the whole phrase, and that's how I know which preposition to use. I'm learning Portuguese, so there's a lot of things where there's no preposition, there is a preposition, and then different prepositions. It's crazy. But so do I think that drilling me on the connections, these prepositions, and which verbs and which prepositions, drilling me on that, is that going to make me a better learner?
That just her? Okay. So wait a second, see if she can rejoin. Oh, there she is.
Am I here? That was
Yeah.
me. Wonderful. We're on a roll today. All right. Sorry for the sarcastic tone too. Sarcasm is not usually helpful. Am I sharing my screen again? You guys good?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm seeing another one of mine. Miriam is over here and she's left her video on, and I'm happy to see this familiar face over here. That's keeping me going. Thank you, Miriam. All right, so will they communicate better? Are they going to be better learners? Are they going to be willing to keep learning? And so if you are drilling and testing and putting a huge amount of your grade value for a course on their accuracy in these particular grammar points, that doesn't really pass the test on this filter, these filters. And so again, it doesn't mean that you don't talk about grammar. So here's some situations when you would, and this is another place where we say we can make good judicious decisions about when we are going to focus in on grammar and which grammar we're going to focus on. And we can effectively decide what we're going to do when and when we can emphasize it. So if we're doing interpretive mode, then they don't need to master the forms, they need to understand what they mean. And they're going to pay more attention to those that are going to be important for understanding the text. And so you yourself always have to know a lot more grammar than they do, right? You have to know, you as a teacher need a strong background, need to be very solid, because you're making your decisions about what to pay attention to and what's important. And you need your own tools and resources to go and analyze how the language works and not just rely on your own intuition. That's a whole workshop that's separate from this workshop. I have a website for that. And plus whole courses. We're not going to worry about that. You as a teacher do need to know a lot about how the language works and about how grammar works and about how grammar is acquired. And even that we don't really need to talk about grammar, but lexicogrammatical patterns. All right, but we're going to focus on forms that matter for the particular text, spoken or written, that we're trying to comprehend. And we can identify some of those ahead of time, but they should be related to that particular text. They should be meaningful. It should be clear that they're tightly connected to what we are trying to comprehend here and now. Then for the interpersonal speaking, this is where the main focus is being understood. And so if we stop them and give them a pop-up grammar lesson in the middle of them trying to make themselves understood, that's not going to help either. So what we want to do is encourage and give implicit feedback. We want to help them frame what they're trying to say. We want to let them know when communication breaks down. And we want to teach them strategies. This is their strategic competence. We want them to have strategies for when the negotiation breaks down and how to fix it. And so, yeah, you might listen to a whole task that you've given that's very interpersonal and then say, you know, guys, I heard this over and over again. Let's look at that. And have a few minutes where we just like, yeah, now we're just going to drill down just a little bit on this thing that I thought was holding you back. But again, high levels of accuracy are not important at that point. Making themselves understood. And if they aren't understood, they adjust. And that's another sweet spot where learning happens. You need that to happen. Those moments where you're misunderstood and you adjust. That's where learning happens. And that doesn't happen if you're not trying to be understood, if you're not trying to convey meaning. So you need a compelling task. For presentational, this is a moment when we can dig in and focus intensively on the forms, and we can actually talk about accuracy in a way that is motivated. So if we say, look, you have an audience for this, and your audience needs to understand very clearly, independently of you, you are trying to express something a little more complex, and you want to make sure it comes across well and that there's a good impression of you. And at that point, you can motivate their attention on accuracy a little bit more. The other thing about presentational is that you need to polish. That's part of what it means in presentational speaking, is that you revise, you rehearse, you polish. And in those moments, when you're polishing that thing that you're creating, you can correct things and get to a higher level of accuracy. And that's another sweet spot where learning can happen. And at that point, you don't correct every error. We know for sure that doesn't help. They just can't take it in. And it'll wear you out. But you can, again, say, here are things that are at your level that are appropriate for you to have mastered by now. I'm going to point out a few of those things that I'd like you to work on when you revise this. Or next time we have something you're writing that is like this, I want you to focus on that. And at that point, you, again, are being strategic based on your background and your knowledge and your reflection and your analysis of what is needed. You're picking and choosing what to focus on. You aren't always going to know exactly what that individual learner needs next or what your whole class needs next, but you develop intuitions about it and you can develop more knowledge about it so that you can make good decisions about what to focus on, what to give feedback on. So when we're deciding what to do, there are these several moments where we're going to make these decisions about grammar and about how to incorporate it and about how to plan. And so one thing is when we're choosing materials. So we're looking at whether it's the right difficulty level. We're looking at the patterns that are in the grammar and what we're going to do with those patterns, what's going to be needed in order to comprehend. When we're looking at planning tasks, we're thinking about the objectives of that task. We're thinking about what kind of language is needed to do that. If you're giving, if it's a task that has a lot of advice that you're giving, or that you are responding politely and you need to be able to make those adjustments, at that moment, you might do some intensive work on the particular forms that you need in order to give advice, in order to speculate, in order to evaluate, in order to compare, because of the task that you're doing. I love talking about debates, where in a debate, you're not just talking about the language of the debate or the content, the topic of the debate, but you're actually talking about the language you use in order to convince someone, the language that you use in order to disagree. But again, it's tied to meaning, it's tied to purpose, it's tied to what we're trying to accomplish. When you design assessments, so you're thinking, what do they really need to master in order to move on? And an assessment is not a test. An assessment is not the same thing as grading, which are other rabbit holes we could go down. All right, assessment is not the same thing as grading. And then giving feedback. How do we choose what to give feedback on? How do we decide that? How do we do that in a way that's still motivating? Because again, what did we say? The main thing we want to happen is they should be better communicators, they should be better learners, and they should want to keep learning. It doesn't mean that you don't talk about grammar, but it means that when you make those choices, you're still tied to the overall goal, which is for them to communicate more effectively in the target language. And if you get away from that, then it will demotivate. You can only do so much of that without losing the motivation that you want them to have to keep developing. So I know we are very short on time. So Neil, are we wrapping up?
You can take your time if you got a few more things to say.
Well, I actually wanted to hear back, because I think this is where we land on going back to those things that divide us versus bring us together. So I know that you guys have been responding in the chat. I need to go back and read some more of the chat to see where we are here recently. Sometimes I can do this with other people working with me, and then they are able to facilitate the chat while I keep talking. But so the question that I would then put out to you is, I've been talking about grammar and about how we'd make our decisions about grammar. And I've told you that quite often the conversation around grammar and what to teach one and what to hold students accountable for and how to hold them accountable, it divides us in programs. So going back to the situation. So here's someone whose take on this I respect a lot and has been influential with a lot of teachers who promote comprehensible input based approaches, and this person in his own program is having this discord. What do we do? So what do we do? What are your thoughts? What are your recommendations for ways to take some of these things? And it's not just grammar, it's also using textbooks, it's also some of these other things. Then what have you done? What have you tried? What has worked for you to help bridge some of those divides? So I don't think we can do a breakout for this, but my program does meetups. They're once a month this semester. Those meetups are for discussion. They're very participant driven. This semester, we're going to be talking about, actually, honestly, the category for our meetups this semester is fun. It's in creativity. So how do we keep having fun? But it's specifically drama-based approaches, arts-based approaches, music, games, things that you do where you're bringing in your own joy, the things that give you joy, whether they directly have to do with language learning or not, and then bring them into the classroom. And so that is one of the ways that you could also come and connect and have some conversations that would unpack some of these things if you want to do something that's more interactive. But for now, I'd like you to just try to answer this in the chat. And then I'm going to, while that's happening, I'm going to give you, like I said, I'm going to give you the slides. You have my website, and so you'll be able to follow links, and you'll see some other things. So I've got, this is a blog post from a while ago. This is another blog post that I've written that's on defining comprehensible input, because the way we define it in SLA is very different from the way that it's been defined as an approach. And it kind of unpacks that and says, this is what's out there, and this is what the sources say about what it is and it's not. It's definitely not against it. So there was a point when I was afraid that would be interpreted that way, and it's not. It's more, we need to just understand it better. And then let's see, what else have I got for you? So this is the workshop on discovering grammar. This is one that goes deeper into how we do the kind of language analysis that supports your decisions about what grammar to teach when with different texts. It can be used in a self-directed way, this website, if you want to go through it. If you're interested in that, let me know. And then this is where I'm kind of wanting to pick your brains again. So if there are these things we've talked about that have been contentious, I rephrased them, and I said, well, here's a positive thing we can say about a lot of those things. So these are, I think, all things that are kind of unexpected, and yet things that we can possibly argue in a way that wouldn't be too extreme and that wouldn't be detrimental to our ability to coordinate with other teachers. And so in a way, I'm asking you to tell me what my next presentation should be. Which of these would you like to really debate, discuss further? And so I have a poll for that as well. And for this, you can add more if you want to. But what we're going for here is, what are some things that kind of relate to some of those same issues that have been contentious, that have been discussed and debated among teachers, and rephrase them as something that gives us more common ground. So of those, which ones do you want to talk about more? Great. And so I'm going to scroll back through. Yeah. And so I do a lot of on LinkedIn pushing things out. So when I see things that are really useful, I really like to be able to push things out. So we have my LinkedIn and my Twitter, and we have our own group on LinkedIn, and those are where I just, when things come through that I think are going to be beneficial, that I like to make sure I have access. And one thing we're also doing is trying to get better at making our students' projects and course designs, activity designs, all those things that they do for us more available so that other teachers can get to them. So actually what I teach more than grammar now is intercultural competence. I teach culture and intercultural competence. And when I do that, there is definitely an element of saying, you may be focused on culture. You may be designing a task that focuses on culture. You still need to know what language is needed for them to carry out that task. And there's that piece that needs to be incorporated into that of saying, okay, maybe we do need a little bit of digging in, focusing on the language that's needed, but still the overall task is focused on a goal that's non-linguistic, and developing intercultural competence. So again, we're making them better learners, we're making them more adaptable. In the long run, we're making them desire the learning more and just stick with it more. And there's almost nothing that we can say to them about grammar. There's almost nothing we can say to them about the language that's going to drive their love of the language the way that love of the language has driven us. What we can do is continue to encourage them. We can continue to give them compelling input. We can give them the feedback, the right feedback at the right time. And then that's going to help move all of us forward, not only so they will continue learning, but also that we can continue enjoying our jobs and see our jobs having the effect that we want them to have. All right, so I'm scrolling back up to see more of this advice that you want to give. And if we have time, I think someone can unmute. Do we have someone who wants to unmute and tell us what you have worked on, what you have done to help bring together some of this discord? And so Catherine, so the Department of One situation is also another presentation that you can get from my website. But it's on what do you do if you're the only teacher? So it can be a nice thing that you don't have Discord to worry about, and yet who do you lean on, and who develops you, and who observes you, and who gives you a sense if you're making the right choices or not, and who helps you choose materials. So that's something that I realized I needed to be careful about as I kept talking about departments of one and their challenges. And I talk a lot about less commonly taught languages. So I am not part of we have the National Lictal Resource Center here at Michigan State now. And my group is doing a project for that called Vivid. That's virtual video-based development for teachers of less commonly taught languages. And so we're doing a lot of this kind of content worked into what we're doing with them. But I talked so much about lictals and so much about departments of one, and then I was really surprised this summer when I started talking to teachers who are in big Spanish departments and French departments, how much they were struggling in their own way, but different ways. And a lot of it was this struggle to collaborate and coordinate. Great. I'm so glad that the positive responses are coming through. And I hope that the general message, that what I think matters the most is that you find a way to coordinate with other teachers, that's where you're going to have a sustainable position, a sustainable program, a sustainable approach. And I know you want that for your learners. You want them to go from you to another teacher, and you want them to go on beyond that. And you want that success. And you also, you want to be good leaders in your programs, and you want to have peace in the kingdom, but you also, you want to see things moving forward well. Yeah, that's great. Good, okay. And we're seeing kind of some of the same thing, where sort of the pendulum swings, right? That we kind of go in one direction where we're looking at, we leave the textbook and then we rediscover the textbook. Textbooks are getting better. You have resources like Voces that give you a lot of choices and how you're going to work through those and what you're going to emphasize. And again, it does come back to you. It does, there's a burden on you to make good decisions in that way. So yeah, I knew we were gonna open some cans of worms that we couldn't completely explore today. So I also don't want to give the impression that I'm just sending you off and you have to follow up for this to have value. But if you do want to follow up, then I will definitely take these into account and keep thinking about what you've said here. Staying in the target language all the time can be a problem. That's a good one. That's what I say, is that you choose the time when you're using the first language very judiciously, and you use it well. You pay attention to when you are using the first language, and you don't translate yourself. Do not translate yourself. Use the language meaningfully. Stop. Take a little time in English. Go back to the target language. That's the nutshell. But we can get into more on that another time. So thank you for being here. I appreciated your participation. It was great to have so many people and great to have such an active chat going on. And like I said, I will put things on my website and you can contact me if you have other questions. There are some of my students in the audience. I might put you together with somebody who can get into greater depth with you, or might know somebody who's in your area. That's true in most states. And then when you go to this link, it's going to give you links to other things. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter, or if you want to go to my website, then you'll get those links from that page. That is a trick I picked up from Florencia Henshaw, if you happen to know who she is. So yeah, again, thank you for being here. And then Neil, sorry, this is a little plug for my program, sorry, and I need to apologize, I didn't get the Voces logo in there.
Oh, that's okay.
But if you, okay, so you can make sure that they know what Voces is.
Yeah, I'll do a plug after this.
Yeah, good. Okay, so yeah, so this is the program that I teach in. So these days when I talk about most topics, I end up trying to make sure I'm not just doing a plug for the program, which I'm not, but I think that it does require some depth to really, you need some depth for a lot of these topics. You have references and resources. I didn't cite all of these in the presentation, but you can look at these. And then there's some additional websites that you can look at. Like I said, there's some other things on my website, and I will share this and we'll make sure that you can find it again for everybody who participated in the presentation today. So thanks again, and that's all I have.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's really
My pleasure.
informative. So I'm not a language teacher, and I've taken a handful of language classes throughout high school and college, but I've learned so much since starting at Voces. Learned all about comprehensible input and the different types of language teaching. So it's really cool to just slowly build this knowledge base on the subject.
Yeah, yeah. And I've enjoyed talking to Marie and to Aaron and to Chris Wyszewski, so about the programming for it and how it got started. And yeah, it's been, we're sort of your neighbors. Farmington Hills, so Farmington Hills is about an hour and a half from us.
Okay.
So
well, I am going to share my screen real quick and just talk a little bit about Voces. So we are a collection of world language curriculum housed in hold on, that's in the way. Easily accessible web-based platform available anywhere and on any device. So we have multitudes of titles: French, Spanish, Italian, German, ESL and EFL. Our French and Spanish has both traditional grammar-based styles of teaching and comprehensible input. You can have access during a free trial to anything you want, no limits. So Voces gives you all the benefits of a digital-first platform with none of the drag of physical textbooks. You can use it on any device: phones, tablets, your PCs, Mac. We've had it tested on a smart refrigerator before, and it works. It's full of authentic materials, native speaker audio and video, tons of presentations and assessments. Everything is customizable. So if you see a page you like, but you want to change a few things around on it, you can change the words, the questions, add, remove, reorganize, do whatever you want. There's a ton of auto-graded activities, which saves you time. It's a lot of them. Anything you see throughout our directory that has a little gold coin next to it is auto-graded. So when the students complete it, you can have them see their results right away. You can still go and leave feedback after the fact. And we do integrate with all of the major learning management softwares. So Canvas, Schoology, Microsoft Teams, and Google Classroom seamlessly integrates. So you can like import your classes right into it. You can send your assignments from Voces to the LMS, send your grades over. So our titles, I already said this, but we have curricula available in Spanish, French, German, Italian, and ESL. We are currently working on our second level of Spanish elementary, and then we'll have full K through 12 covered in Spanish. So if anyone has any questions at all, you can call us, you can email us. I'm going to put a link in chat for free trial sign up. And this, I mean, it requires very little info: name, school, email, and then you'll be able to log right in from there with full access to all of our materials. It'll have you select the languages you teach and what titles you're interested in, and you can select as many as you want. So if you teach multiple languages, select everything. And then I mentioned this at the beginning, but we are doing a walkthrough contest right now through February 21st. So if you do sign up for a free trial, I'm also going to put this. Oh, that link I just put in there is for scheduling a meeting. So use that link, schedule a walkthrough. It'll say personal Voces tour, and that will immediately enter you in to win a weekly mystery prize, and then also our grand prize drawing that's going to happen at our spring conference on March 1st. So let me actually put the correct link in. This link is going to be for the free trial sign up. And then the World Language Webinar Series is held monthly. Please follow us on social media. If you're on our news list, you'll get emails about it. Most of you heard about today's via email, but our next one is going to be on February 15th, incorporating readers into the World Language Classroom with Anna Porto. So yeah, if you enjoyed this tonight, stay tuned and join us next time. And again, if anyone has any questions on anything, call us, email us. We're a small team, but we're very communicative. And we hear a lot about how fast our customer service response time is. So cool. Well, thanks for joining, everyone. Thank you, Amanda, for presenting. That was awesome. And we'll see y'all soon. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.